We hear a lot about top 5 pen lists that include the Metropolitan and the Safari, etc. What are some cheap pens that are not mentioned in the list but are top worthy? AKA the Platinum Plaisir, J.Herbin Fountain pen, Jinhao, Noodlers, etc., etc. Okay, so I have a video. It's actually the most popular Goulet video we've ever done, called Brian's Top 5 Fountain Pens for Newbies. It's got 140,000 views at this point, which is just crazy. It's only about a year old, so that's kind of cool. But check it out. It's the top 5 pens that I have in there. Now this is for people that are just getting into the hobby. It's the Platinum Preppy, the Pilot Varsity, the Jinhao X750, the Pilot Metropolitan, and the Lamy Safari. And I definitely stand behind all of those as great starter pens, and you can watch that video specifically if you want to see all my reasoning why. But basically, there are other good pens for sure. A lot of the other ones, there might be a little bit of a compromise here and there, but I'll go ahead and touch on some of the ones you mentioned and throw on a couple more. So you mentioned the Platinum Plaisir. Definitely, it's a good one. It's really, the guts of it are the same as a Platinum Preppy. So if you like the way the Preppy writes and you want a nicer pen body, Plaisir is a great way to go. Now, for most people just getting into pens, even spending $20 on a Plaisir might be a bit of a commitment. So the Preppy is the same writing experience in terms of how the nib writes, but in a cheaper pen. So that's usually why I push it that way. Also, the Plaisir is made of aluminum, so you can't eyedropper convert it. The Preppy, you can do that. That's kind of a nice to have in the wings for that pen. So there's that. J.Herbin Fountain pen, it's relatively new, so it wasn't even out when I shot that video last year. It's cartridge only, which is just not as ideal for me personally, because when I first got into fountain pens, I got into it for the ink. So I know some people get into fountain pens and they like cartridges because they're easier to use at first, but honestly, you need to learn how to clean and maintain your pens pretty quickly anyway. So using cartridges just because they're easier for like a newbie, I personally take the approach more of, here's a fountain pen, here's how it works, here's how you clean it so that it writes well, and just go with that. And then you can use bottled ink, and that's just part of the experience to me. So that's usually the route that I like to go. So I don't usually go the cartridge only route as a great recommendation for newbies, just kind of personally. Well, you didn't even specifically ask about newbies, but just top pens in general. So for me, cartridge only pens are never going to really be top of my list, but the J.Herbin pen is a decent pen for, $14 or around there. I forget the exact price, but it's a decent little pen for what it is. So it's not something I would recommend against. It's just not like the go-to pen. So keep that in mind. Noodlers, you threw out Noodlers. Oh boy, okay, so Noodlers, it is a fantastic fountain pen for the price, especially if you want to get into flex pens. There's nothing else that even comes close. So the challenge though is a flex pen for someone who's kind of just getting into it, a starter pens and stuff like that, is really not, well, I wonder how much if I'm focusing too much on the new thing. I know, Ricky, when you asked your question, you didn't say specifically new pens, you just said cheap pens. So, okay, I'll adjust my focus a little bit here. So for a cheap pen, yes, a Noodler's pen is a phenomenal way to go, especially if you go with an Ahab or a Conrad. You can swap those nibs out with another number 6 size nib that you can get. So Noodler's has a non-flix nib that you can get for a couple bucks, and also Goulet nibs too. Phenomenal to be able to swap those out. So that is still a really inexpensive option to get a pretty decent writing pen. So the flex thing tends to be something you need to get used to, and especially if you are newer, which tend to, a lot of newer people focus on cheaper pens. So that's kind of why I've been going down that road for this question. But that might not necessarily be the case. I might be making too much of an assumption here on that. But anyway, so the Noodler's flex pens can take a little bit of getting used to, but for what they are, they're phenomenally priced pens. So definitely would recommend some of those as long as you know what you're getting into. Jinhao, yes, absolutely. I had that X750 in the video for newbies, but certainly the X450, the 159 would be great options as well. Those are all the ones I currently have at gouletpens.com. I know Jinhao's got a lot of other different models that they have, but the reason I like those ones is they all use these number 6 nibs, which you can swap out with Goulet nibs or other number 6 nibs, which is kind of cool. So you can greatly increase the writability of those relatively inexpensive pens with a better nib and have an even better writing experience for really still a pretty cheap price. Let's see here, another one, Eco Classic or Ice Sport is one that I would recommend. That's a pretty good inexpensive one. Those are cartridge only as well, kind of like the J.Herbin one. You can eyedropper convert those, so that's kind of nice. The J.Herbin one, you have to modify it to be able to eyedropper convert it. So that's kind of annoying. So I definitely don't really push that aspect of it unless you're going to totally just hack the thing and epoxy the holes and stuff. But that's kind of crazy. So I would recommend the Kaweco for an eyedropper conversion, so that can be kind of cool. They got some other more broader nib options than the J.Herbin pen has, but so those can be kind of cool. Lots of different color options and things like that. So Kaweco is usually a pretty decent option. Also the Pilot Parallel, for what it is, it's a $10 pen if you want to do calligraphy style. So they only have basically stub nibs on those that can be pretty broad, so it's not like a good everyday writing pen, but if you want to mess around doing some kind of calligraphy and hand lettering stuff, Parallel is a phenomenal pen for that, and they write really well, and a lot of people do nib modifications on them too. You can kind of grind away and do some cool stuff. I see some neat things on Instagram that folks are doing these days with that kind of stuff, so some interesting things to kind of play around with there. Another great one that's come out relatively recently is the Trizzyb Eco. For under $30 now, it's a piston filling pen that I actually think writes really well. I have one right here actually that's inked up. And, so it's basically similar kind of to a Twisby 580, kind of the same mechanism, same ink capacity and everything. But the design is just a little bit different, especially in the cap. The aesthetic design is different. It doesn't have a removable nib unit though. So that's kind of like one drawback to it. But the nib and feed kind of pull out of it easily. You do have to kind of fill it in a certain way. You got to fill it and then kind of draw out any air bubbles that get caught in there. That's kind of the only like thing. And Twisby has some instructions in their literature about how to do that. But that's a pretty decent writing pen for the price, especially. And then the last one, to finish up with the Trizzyb Eco, it is a newer pen. It's really hot in demand, so it's kind of limited availability. That's one thing that's kind of tough about that at this point in time. And then the last I'm going to say is kind of the Lamy Logo or the All-Star. So those ones are going to be kind of similar to the Safari, just as a good alternative. The nibs swap on all those pens, so you can use them interchangeably. If you have different nibs on different pens, you can swap them out on the Logo, All-Star, Safari, Vista. Those are all good recommendations, so go check those out as well.